Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content. We will be continuing our coverage of the Olympics, giving our post-game thoughts. We did a live stream on Sunday, post-Team USA versus Serbia, so please go and check that out. The VOD is up for your viewing. We will also be continuing our off-season breakdowns of NBA teams within this episode. Before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we'll kick it off with Team USA. We just were recording this not too long after we did a live stream and after Team USA took care of Serbia. They won 110-84. When you watch the game, it was actually, the final score wasn't really indicative of how the game really went for most of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Serbia started with the lead. They went up, I believe, 10-2 in the first 3 minutes of the game. And then, with Team USA, they swapped out Embiid with Anthony Davis. And then eventually Kevin Durant came off the bench, and they were kind of able to stabilize after, right? Kevin Durant, 21 points in the first half, right? He had 23 for the game. Almost all of them came in the first half. Made his first 8 shots, shot 8 for 9 from the field, right? Was, probably one of the biggest difference maker, if not the biggest difference maker for the team in this game to allow them to get the win. LeBron also chipped in with 21 points, 7 rebounds, 9 assists, along with a steal. 9 of 13 from the field, right? You also had Steph Curry with 11 points, Anthony Edwards with 11 points, 5 rebounds, as well as a block, right? You had that one of the signature plays of the game where Edwards, blocks a guy's shot. They go down in transition. LeBron gets the and one. You also saw Derek White chip in. Bam and AD, not quite as dominant of a, two-way duo as we saw, which is something Yarby talked about in the live stream, where it wasn't quite as impactful on the defensive end as, you would have liked, but they still had, solid games. Booker, right, chipped in with 12 points, all from the three-point line. But kind of one of the interesting things that happened in this game was that you had a couple of guys, that didn't play at all. Jason Tatum got 0 minutes. Tyrese Halliburton got 0 minutes. Steve Kerr, his explanation, at least for Tatum 0 minutes, was I went with the combinations that made sense. With Halliburton, we saw his minutes kind of start to decline as the exhibitions went on. Just felt like the fit seems just kind of funky, with, Edwards initially, was coming off the bench. Then he was a starter for a game. Now it seems like he's coming off the bench as sort of like the 6-man engine scorer. And it's just kind of hard to have him and Halliburton play together because they both kind of need the ball for the most part. Edwards is just, I think, a more, I guess as a scorer, a little bit more dynamic, also a better defender. And it's just kind of hard, to kind of have all those guys play together. It's kind of like with Drew Holiday. He's starting, even though some of the other guards, are better than him. But, he's such a good fit in that starting five, as a guy who can defend from the perimeter and also can kind of switch as well. So that's kind of something to like. But turnovers were still kind of a problem. Not quite as horrible as some of the other games, because there were some turnovers that were kind of when the game was out of reach. But still, 17 is a lot. A lot of turnovers. Their offense kind of mainly carried them for most of the game. They shot 18 of 32 from 3, so over 50%, over 60 from the field, right? So, that's pretty good, right? 62 from the field, 56 from 3, only 60 from the line, but not a whole lot of free throw attempts, right? You don't usually get to the line a ton in in Olympic basketball anyways. So, you don't usually see guys get like 15 free throw attempts. That's just not how they usually referee things here, right? Because some of the rules are different, right? There's no defensive 3 seconds, which we've talked about. Offensive goaltending, that's okay. You can pull a ball off the rim, right? We've talked about that. So, but again, Team USA, they still won by almost 30 points, and what was a, good but not great, game necessarily. I know the final score, like I said, would make you feel like it was great. But again, in spurts, you saw flashes of why they are the favorites and why they, can continue to be, really, really dominant. Because at the end of the day, it was still a big win, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that they played 100% flawless basketball. But clearly they got the job done enough to win by, almost 30 points, right? In a game where, again, we talked about it where we thought in the last podcast that Team USA would win. but it may not necessarily be like a huge blowout. It was a blowout, but it was a back and forth game for a while. But it was still a game where you knew Team USA was going to win, even though it felt kind of dire at certain points, mainly in the first few minutes.
Yeah, I mean they dominated. They pulled it out. And we talked about it on the short. Quarter by quarter, you could kind of see them figuring things out as the game went on. You had some dominating performances from LeBron, KD. You already talked about it. These guys, they're leading the charge. And I think, them being the leaders speaks volumes alongside, a guy like Steph. And, I think Steph is one of the more intriguing players on this roster where,
Right.
superstar, but he's fitting into a role player kind of role on this, star-studded team where, he's a guy that just comes in and shoots three. Yeah, exactly. Like he's a guy that comes into the game, shoots threes off the ball, and, that could be a huge spark. And then you have obviously your ISO scorers in KD, Anthony Edwards as well. I think the question just gets raised about Joel Embiid, where you kind of look at his production, you look at how offense kind of looks when he's out there. Very post-dominant player. You kind of have to feed him in order for him to kind of get going. He can't necessarily, bring the ball up and then create on his own necessarily, like a Kevin Durant or Anthony Edwards. So it's a little bit different. It's a slower pace. And you can kind of tell that teams are kind of prepared for that. And they already know kind of how to handle that versus, some other guys who may be a little bit more versatile, especially like even chemistry-wise. Awesome lob play from LeBron James and AD. That was pretty spectacular. You're probably not going to see too much of that. Maybe outside of like, you're not going to see LeBron and Joel Embiid doing plays like that is what I'm trying to say, right? Because of AD's, athleticism. And obviously Joel Embiid also looks a little bit hurt, and I'm not trying to harp on him too much, but he was getting booed throughout the entire, game, obviously because he chose USA over France. But nonetheless, I think you have to love everything that happened in this game. In terms of how they won this game, final score 110-84. So a dominating game. Everybody kind of did their thing, and they filled into their role, seamlessly, if you ask me. But it is interesting that Tatum and Halliburton didn't play, because I think, there is room for those guys to get some minutes, but, obviously they didn't need them, or else, they would have played, because, look at the score, 110-84. You don't necessarily need everybody to play.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of what we talked about also in the live stream, right, with the Jaylen Brown situation, right, where he's on, social media, and understandably so, right? He's clearly not happy that he was left off the Team USA team, but we talked about it in the live stream where, a big part of, the issue with, having that many really good players on the team is not everybody's going to play, and so you do need guys on the roster that are going to be okay with not getting minutes, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say that Halliburton and Tatum shouldn't get minutes, because that's not the point I'm trying to make, but, you're not going to hear them I guess kind of be upset, about not getting minutes, because they could easily make the case for why they should get minutes, right? Tatum was on the best team in the NBA and was the best player on it, right? And then you had Halliburton, who was the starting point guard, right? All NBA guy for a team that went to the conference final. So, of course, they can make the case, that they should be able to get minutes, over several of these guys. But that's just not how this works, more often than not. So, again, like, you had a situation with the Dream Team, right, where it was Isaiah Thomas, and he could have been easily on the Dream Team, and he was left off, right, because somebody didn't want him on the team.
Right.
So
there is politics involved. Like, even like a guy like Kyrie, like, yeah, he could be on this team for sure, considering, he was just in the NBA Finals, but, does it work with the fit? Are you prepared to kind of, deal with the things that come with having these guys? Because it's not like, that they're problems or anything like that. It's just like, there is some history there. And like with Jaylen Brown, there's off the court stuff, that's public. We all know that him and Nike are not best friends, and Nike is the sponsor of Team USA. And Jaylen Brown is a smart guy. His peers have, labeled him one of the smartest players, if not the smartest player in the league in terms of, not basketball IQ, but more so off the court stuff. So, he's not an idiot. So I think there is probably some truth to what he's speaking to. It's just unfortunate because, you hinted at it in the live stream talking about the drama that can potentially seep into the Boston Celtics, and that could be their undoing, and it's hilarious because I remember back in the finals and going into it, I think it was Jason Kidd who kind of, sewed the needle with this, and he was like, Jaylen Brown's their best player, and then everybody was like, whoa, he is. And then, that kind of sparked like who's really, the lead guy for the Boston Celtics is Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. And now that conversation has once again come up, but not just with him, with his other teammates in Derek White, Drew Holiday,
Right.
and now, with Grant Hill being in the mix as well. So it's an odd situation, but, I hope it doesn't detract from the dominance that Team USA is putting on.
Right, because what you don't want is a scenario where, not that, they continue to talk about it, but just a scenario where it bleeds into the season and then
Right.
possibly, gets in the way of going back to back. Because we talked about it with the Warriors, different situation, but still a scenario where that stuff that happened right in the offseason with the Draymond punch, it was very clear that drama carried into the regular season and impacted that team and prevented them from being able to go back to back. There were other reasons as well. They just weren't good enough. But, the punch clearly, was a factor as well, right? Because then that kind of set up some situations where there were clearly guys on the team that had some issues with one another, right?
Yep. 100%. And, I don't know. But Team USA, they're doing their thing, though. Like, you can clearly tell. They handled Serbia with ease. Like you said, cold start, as it's always been, or as it's been throughout the exhibition games. And the trend has continued into the first game. But, once they get hot, because that's the thing. And we talked about on the podcast or on the live stream where it's like they have that safety net of depth where this team is unbeatable because of the guys. Like, if you look at the bench for Team Serbia, like, you have Jovic and then some other guys who you probably don't really know. But then you look at the U.S., you had KD, Bam, AD, Anthony Edwards, and Derek White coming off the bench. It's the best bench unit in the Olympics. So they always have that to fall back on.
Yeah, you have a guy in Jason Tatum who was on the team that won the title who didn't even play.
Yeah, so, D&B, man. That's crazy. Right, Jason Tatum D&Ping. Yeah, exactly. That's wild.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you had a guy in Kevin Durant who hadn't played up to this point because of injury, and he just slides in and just, drops a nice 23 points and misses only one shot. So,
dominating,
again,
man.
At a certain point, and again, at a certain point, he'll be in the starting five, and then that'll shake up the rotation, a little bit more. So.
Yeah, but it makes sense, if KD slides in, then somebody's minutes have to go. And, I guess the only other wing where you can kind of detract from is Jason Tatum. And they won without him. So.
My guess is that Booker probably comes off the bench, right? He probably comes out of the starting five, unless they start him instead of Drew. But I feel like, Booker, not that he and Durant are the same player, but just I feel like, a lot of what Booker provides in the starting five, Durant can probably do that.
Yeah, so. Yeah. And I think, putting Booker and putting him on the bench would probably make your bench even better, if you ask me. So, I'd prefer KD to go into the starting lineup.
Yeah, and again, like I'm assuming they're gonna ease his way back anyways because of conditioning and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that he's rusty, but just you're not gonna be able to have a calf injury and then come back and play like 25 minutes.
Yeah, he only played 17. Just FYI.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see if Jaylen Brown and his his Donda Sports rivalry with Nike kind of come back to haunt him. We'll see. Just kidding, but
but either way, it is a topic of conversation though. It's the real. There's a lot going on. Like and Jaylen Brown's been taking a lot of W's like recently. Obviously winning the finals MVP. I'm not going to name the other stuff. Y'all already know on Twitter what I'm talking about. But I mean, the guy is taking massive W's. So, I'm rooting for the guy because I really do like him. And yeah, I think he deserves to be on this team. It's just a matter of who do you take out. That becomes the conversation.
Right. So, yeah. So, again, Team USA won their first game on their quest to the gold. So, again, good performance. Again, I feel like, you would like, if they want to, dominate, they'll need to be better. But I think they can still win even without being dominant. Obviously, the big question that everybody's always had is like, is this team better than, like you mentioned in the live stream, right? Dream team from 92, Redeem team from 2008. Hopefully they're better than the 2014 that lost.
Yeah, facts,
Hopefully
bro.
they're better than them. I would think they'd be better than 2016 and 2020 just because I think you have a little bit more high-end talent. But, again, I think, again, they're on their way. They're still going to have to prove it because they're going to have to win. But I think, like you and I have said, talent-wise, I think they can stack up against anybody. It's just they need the resume of actually winning it all before they can actually get there. I think that's, more than, reasonable.
Yes.
Yeah, so now...
Oh, boy.
Time for some fun stuff.
Yeah, right.
Offseason. We did the Boston Celtics in the last episode. This time we're going to do a duo, I guess, of a couple of teams, right? Some teams that had a little bit... that are in a little bit different of situations, right? It's not the Sixers, it's not the Knicks, Um, it's their other team. It's the other couple of teams in the Atlantic Division: the Brooklyn Nets, Toronto Raptors. So I don't know which one you prefer to start with. You know, guess we can probably start. I guess with Brooklyn. I guess because I feel like there's
Yeah,
probably a little bit more to talk about here,
and it's
right?
better.
You know, they had
Spoiler alert.
yeah, yeah. So we'll start with them, right? So obviously we know what happened with their situation, right? So we know with the Brooklyn Nets, again, just kind of wild where this team, all the directions and twists and turns that have occurred with this team over the last few years, right? Because you go back to the 2018-2019 season, right? That was the year, where they had what, like D'Lo and all the other guys, right? The young guys that came in, and they kind of overachieved, lost in the first round, in five. And then after that, right, what did they do? They went out and they got Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, right? Durant doesn't play because he's coming off the Achilles tear. Then the following year, he comes back, right? Then they fired Kenny Atkinson. They brought in Steve Nash. Then eventually they brought in Harden. And it looked like the team was, on track to possibly win a title. Then they have the injuries. Then they have the foot shot, right? With Durant, with the toe. We know what happened there. And
Ugh.
then the following season, they don't do as well, right? Obviously they start the year off, a little bit shaky, right? Obviously you have Kyrie, right? Who had the issue of he doesn't really play, because of, the off the court stuff. And then eventually Harden gets traded to Philly. Then, you know, Durant and Kyrie, they lose in the first round. They get swept by Boston. Then you're like, all right, let's see what happens next season, right? Then eventually Durant asks out. They tough it out, start off horrible, fire Nash, bring in Jacques Vaughn. Then, they bounce back, play pretty well. Then they still get moved. And then it's pretty clear that the team's in another trajectory, right? They get Mikal Bridges, they get Cam Johnson, they get the picks. They still make the playoffs, but as we talked about, it wasn't really them that did the work. It was really Durant and Kyrie and the other guys, right? Um, but now they're in a completely new situation. So they were horrible last year. And since then they've been pretty busy, right? Obviously they, made the trade with Houston, right, to get their picks back that, they got from Phoenix or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like whatever, yeah, or the Harden trade or whatever. They got the picks back
Yeah,
from the
the
Harden
Houston.
trade. I think that was yeah, with Houston, right?
Yep.
So because before the problem with Brooklyn was they didn't have their own picks, right? They were in a scenario where they could be really bad and not keep their own picks. It would go elsewhere. But they got him back, and they also moved Mikal Bridges, right? They traded him. We talked about that where it sounded like at the deadline there could have been some noise about him going to Houston. Didn't happen. He ended up going to New York, right? They got, and it was a return where it was mainly about the picks. Wasn't really about the players involved, right? They got, multiple first round picks back um, in that deal, right? So obviously, no pun intended, right? That's a big deal for Brooklyn, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now they're kind of in a point where, they're in a transitional period, right? They re-signed Nick Claxton, to a multi-year, max deal, basically. I guess what they got Boyan Bogdanovic from New York, Diakite, Shake Milton, and again all those draft picks. They brought back Trendon Watford. They also made that trade where they acquired Zaire Williams right from Memphis and a 2030 second round pick.
Mm-hmm.
So again, pretty active offseason. And honestly, I'm here for it. Right? I think that their offseason, you can pretty much, if you want, this might be the first time in a little while where you can give Brooklyn an A if you want, right? If because I think, you look at things from the perspective of, they got rid of guys they needed to get rid of, and they could possibly do more, right? Because there's other guys on the roster where it feels like they could be on the move as well. So, the grade could be changed a little bit. But I think as of right now, I feel like at worst B plus, at best A, because of the fact that you not only were able to move Mikal Bridges, but you got a lot of picks. Not that those picks will mean a whole lot because some of those picks were not the Knicks picks. Not all those picks will be good. But, again, you traded Mikal Bridges for something, right? Because you weren't going to get an all-star back for Mikal Bridges. This was a picks, type of return. And, the best part is, right, I guess you re-signed Nick Claxton, which, is a lot of money. But more importantly, you're now well positioned to tank. And now you're going to be one of the worst teams in the NBA next season. We know the direction the team is taking. They're going to suck. They're going to be stinky. But again, you're gonna tank for Cooper Flag, right? Whatever rhyme you want to come up with. SAG for flag, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what terms people got out there, but their offseason, I think, was pretty good. And again, it could be better, right? Because again, they could move Cam Johnson, they could move Dorian Finney-Smith. I don't know what happens with Ben Simmons. Does he just become an expiring deal that maybe they move at the deadline, or does he just stay and then just kind of just live out the rest of his contract in Brooklyn? Whatever, I don't know, but I think for Brooklyn, they finally did what they should have done, which is now you got to rebuild. And, again, that other trade that I mentioned where they got the picks back from Houston is huge because now you're well positioned to do that because, again, you get those picks back and now you don't have to worry about if we stink, right, we're giving another team a potential lottery pick. That's not us. But now you get it back. And so, you couldn't have really scripted a much better offseason for them. Again, because when we talk about grading teams' offseasons, each team's curve is going to be a little bit different, right? Because there are teams where they're contenders, so we're basing it off of did the moves they make put them closer to contention. Then there's other teams where they're kind of in the mix, so maybe they need to do a little bit more to get up to the next level. Then you have the other teams like a Brooklyn where they should probably look to move forward to a rebuild stage, not a contending stage. And they accomplished that. So I think they pretty much did everything you could ask for. Of course, like I said, could they do more? Sure. But even if they didn't do anything else, I would still give them that A because I didn't really expect them to do a lot of this. This is something that we thought they should do, but you just never know what some of these teams are going to do because, they could have done it before, but, better late than never. And, again, the big thing is now, as I already said, now you're positioned to try to compete to get the number one pick.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with a B minus for Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think pre-Bridges trade would have been an automatic F, if you ask me. But this return has catapulted their grade for me personally in terms of what you were able to get in return for a guy like Bridges. 6 first-round picks. Awesome. I think that's awesome. That fits your timeline perfectly. Now, I think it just raises a little bit more questions. Do you flip Bogdanovich? Do you flip Cam Johnson? Do you flip Dorian Finney-Smith? These are all guys that I think we've heard a decent amount of rumors on. And what do you do with it? Do you try and go in, on getting back young players, or do you actually go for additional picks? Because they could go the Oklahoma City route and just stockpile up on picks and hope that, that they can get the most out of those. But, their number one goal, obviously, is Cooper Flag, the tank for Cooper Flag. That's the big thing. And, yeah, like you talked about, retrieving their own first round picks, in 2025 and 2026. That's the deal breaker. Because I think that gives you really a 3-year tanking period, and then you can flip, picks down the line for some even better assets potentially if you hit on those picks and hopefully you get like the number 1 or number 2 pick or something like that. So I do understand why people are super optimistic. I don't understand people who are super pessimistic where it's like you give them a C because they're at least trying, like you talked about. They're active, and I think signs of activity like this are better than doing absolutely nothing, especially when you're in a tier where Brooklyn is, where you're not super duper relevant. You're not good by any means, but you have the potential to be down the line. And all you need to do is just continue to add assets and keep guys on team friendly deals as well. Cause I think the Claxton one, although the price is steep, I think, he's good because I know like he has solid defense and very mid offense, I guess you could call it, for that price point. But, it doesn't, have me blaring the red alarms like this is a complete overpay. I think it'll look better down the line, especially when they are potentially contending alongside, their picks and stuff like that. But yeah, hats off to them for pulling off a king's ransom for Mikal Bridges, in all honesty.
Yeah, because I didn't really expect them to get that.
Yeah, there are some other like questions, like I already talked about with the guys that they could flip, bringing in Zaire Williams. I think the other one was freaking Killian Hayes, bringing him in.
Yeah,
intriguing. Intriguing stuff. Moves that obviously signal we're just taking flyers on guys that didn't work out elsewhere, and you get a home here. Maybe you can do something here, but at the same time, you're not a long-term piece. We're trying to be as bad as possible. Boom, they're tanking. It's obvious. Yeah. It's an obvious tank. Don't expect this team to be relevant, good next year. but expect them
Right.
to be top 5 in the lottery for
Yeah.
picking
It will
in the draft.
probably be a very hard watch, if you're trying to watch the team. But again, that's what they should be doing. They should be,
Exactly.
yeah, they should be a stinky team.
Yeah, that should be their goal. And you look at the roster, it's bad. In all
Yeah.
honesty, it's very
What's the
bad.
starting five for this group?
I think you have to have probably Schroeder at the 1,
Okay.
Cam Thomas at the 2,
Okay. And then Claxton at center. And
Claxton at
then
center, maybe Bogdanovich. Do you put Bogdanovich or do
Dorian
you start?
Finney-Smith?
Because I feel like you would probably want to start Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith, right?
Yeah, I mean, because I guess for now, because we don't know what they're going to do with the rest of the roster, like Cam Johnson and Claxton, I think start for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to assume Cam Thomas is going to start, and then Schroeder's probably going to start. So that probably leaves the other forward spot open. So, like you said, is it Dorian Finney-Smith? Is it Ben Simmons?
Oh, no.
Is it someone else? I don't know, because I mean, does Simmons even play?
At this point, last offseason, I fell into the trap. The offseason workout videos, all the hype. We already know what this guy once was. But at this point, I don't, if he does play, I don't think it's going to be very meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that might be mean, but, I'm just trying to really speak truth because at this point, I'm kind of fed up of being swindled every year.
Right. And again, I just wonder, it's a $40 million expiring deal. And like I said, I do wonder, do they use it as, I mean, he's not getting traded to a team that's good. So, because that's a lot of salary. So I just wonder, is it a scenario where it's hey, let's swap our big expiring deal with your big expiring
Oh my
deal.
God. Could you imagine?
What?
I'm just imagining that at the deadline or something stupid.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah, what if it was Zach LaVine for Ben Simmons or something like that, right? Can we do that? I'm not saying that's gonna happen. I'm just saying, could that be a possible thing, right?
I mean, that's the only guy money wise that would match up, right?
Yeah, and then Chicago goes from a long-term LaVine deal to an expiring with Simmons, but then it's why would Brooklyn do that?
Right.
It's I don't know, because it sounds like LaVine might just be stuck in Chicago, but I do kind of wonder what happens with the Simmons deal. Does he just stay and just the contract just runs out, or does he get moved and and again some type of big contract for big contract swap? I don't know. I have no clue.
Yeah, the return value would be my concern. Yeah, it would be great to get Ben Simmons off your team, but what are you taking on in order to get rid of him?
Right.
That's probably a player where you feel like it's a complete overpay. Kind of not necessarily in the same boat as Ben Simmons, not nearly as drastic, but pushing it.
Yeah, it's just kind of wild because I think early in the offseason, this was before the season ended, we were talking about Brooklyn like they were in one of the worst spots in the NBA because it seemed like they weren't very good, but didn't really also have a pathway to be good. And then they didn't even have their pick. So even if they're bad, then it wouldn't matter. But now they're, in a much better spot. They're still going to stink, but at least now they'll actually be bad for something, right? If you're going to be bad, at least you're bad with the potential to get a top pick, right? Because, now if you're a team that's bad, well, now's the perfect time to be horrible. Because now there's a lot more good teams that, probably have enough talent to where they may not just win 20 games. Right, say the Spurs now with year 2 Wemby and Chris Paul and others, they may still not be very good, but they'll have enough talent where they probably will win more games than whatever the over under is, right? So, that's kind of something to think about. And again, I know people are probably going to be like, what about the guys they drafted? Well, they didn't draft anybody because they didn't have any, they didn't have any picks.
Yep.
This time around. So
which is where they supplemented it by trading for Zaire Williams and signing Killian Hayes. You got 2 younger guys in quotes.
Exactly. And I know that they tried to get into the draft, I think, but there were a lot of teams I think tried to make some type of moves and they just weren't able to really, get in and really do a whole lot. So but again, that's kind of what happens sometimes, if I'm going to be honest, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes these teams will look for, moves to kind of pull off, but it doesn't really happen.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so and again, like I said, with Brooklyn, the thing about them from, an off-season standpoint is, as I already mentioned, they have the potential to possibly, up their grade. Where again, they could do even better. Where, if they move, Johnson for something. And again, I'm not expecting like big returns, for any of that, right? Like I'm not expecting anybody, I would hope, to give up, multiple first round picks for Cam Johnson. But just getting anything back for him, just because if you're Brooklyn, you don't really need him on your team,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he's probably better suited, for a team where he can play a role that can kind of help a team win, right? Same with like a Dorian Finney-Smith. You don't want those guys in like high, super high usage roles. You know what I mean? Like you don't really want them doing that because that's just
Right.
not what they're for. But again, on Brooklyn, again they're not good enough to help those guys win like a ton of games.
No.
But it's just if I'm Brooklyn, I'm trying to be as bad as possible because that's really the goal for them at this point.
Yeah.
And I think that they're well on their way, to accomplishing that.
Yeah. This is a start. Great start,
Yeah.
actually.
So the over under for the Brooklyn Nets is 19 and a half. So that's very, very, very bad.
Yeah.
I'm
And
gonna be
are you
honest.
asking
But
me if they get there or not?
yeah, like are you over or under on them winning basically 19 games, I guess.
Probably under, if not around that, because you got to think about. I feel like Detroit's going to be better. I feel like in theory, Charlotte's going to be healthy.
Hmm.
Washington's going to be bad. Toronto's going to be bad. Brooklyn probably bad as well. So
Yeah. I guess the question is who's gonna be worse, the Wizards or the Nets?
Wizards,
Wizards. You think the Wizards will be worse?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well,
Because
we'll get to their over under.
at this point, I think Cam Thomas is better than Jordan Poole. I don't. I think Kyle Kuzma is going to be moved.
Mhm.
Wizards already
Yeah,
lost Tyus Jones.
right,
Like they're losing pieces.
right, and that's the thing with the over unders is some of them may be adjusted a little bit once those deals get done. Like if
Yeah.
the Nets move more guys, then yeah, they'll
Yes. Yeah.
be in the teams.
And
And
I
then if
expect them to do that because I feel like they're going to be in a situation like how Charlotte was with PJ Washington or the Wizards with Daniel Gafford. You move these guys to potential contenders. I don't know, how that's going to work with the CBA in terms of some guys' deals. It's like, oh, holy crap, you're making a lot of money. But
yeah,
I feel like some of those guys could easily be slotted in somewhere on a
yeah,
contender.
yeah. So we'll see. So now we're gonna have to do this. It's the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah.
So what do we do with them from an off-season standpoint? So, obviously when you look at what they did last season, so they went through a lot of change, right? Obviously, last season was kind of the last, I guess, vestige of their championship group, right? Because they moved on from OG Anunoby, moved on from Siakam. We talked about those deals at the time, right? The Anunoby deal was cool that you got back quickly, and RJ Barrett. Siakam, you got back picks, and I guess, nothing else really other than that, right? I guess Bruce Brown. We'll see if they're able to flip him, maybe, but I don't really know. I'm sure teams want him, but I don't know if they want him for 20 million. So, they drafted Grady Dick, and they were bad last year, right? They won 25 games. I think they were the what happened? Weren't they the team I think that Detroit ended up ending their streak against?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So that's already not great. But either way, they did some things. If you look at what they did in the offseason, they re-signed Scotty Barnes to that $200+ million extension, right? Re-signed Emmanuel quickly, do a big max, 100, 70 whatever $1 million extension. Um, in terms of, you know, two-way guys, Ulrich Chomche, right? That was a personal favorite, of
Yes,
ours,
sir.
in the draft. That was a guy. You said what?
I said yes, sir.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, and they had like a couple of draft picks, right? So but at the end of the day, I think the main focus is really on, what have they really done outside of that? And they haven't really done a whole lot. I mean,
Mm-mm.
again, they lost Gary Trent Jr., right? But again, it didn't seem like that they were all that keen on paying him. I guess we can mention, a couple of their draft picks, right? I think Jacoby Walter, right? That was the guy that they took 19th overall, right? And then I think they took Jonathan Mogbo 31st overall. Again, we don't know what they're going to look like once they actually play. I know, with Walter, that's a guard, and then Mogbo, that's kind of like an undersized big, right? With Mogbo, not really much of a shooter. Does have some good rebounding and playmaking and finishing. And then Jacoby Walter, you know, he took a lot of threes, right? When he was in college. And he's got some skills, but he'll still probably need to do some playmaking, development, ball handling, passing.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some skills, but I feel like he's probably a little bit more of a prospect. But I guess it's another guard where it's like, we took Grady Dick, didn't have a great rookie season, got better as the year went on. So hopefully that's something that he can kind of take into next year. But, I can understand not necessarily being completely sold that he's going to pan out. So I guess they're just kind of taking, another shot at another guard. And, again, you have Barrett, you have Quickly, you still have Jakob Poeltl. We'll see what it goes from there, right? You got Scotty Barnes. That's, I guess, kind of the foundation of your team, right? Again, started off the year pretty well. The 3-point shot kind of fell off, but also didn't finish the season because he was hurt. So that's another factor. He was an all-star for the first time, injury replacement, but, he had a good season, right? So obviously very expensive contract, but I think the hope is that, he'll continue to develop and, could he be one of your 2-3 best guys on a really good team? Like, yeah, sure. Right. Maybe not necessarily the best on a championship team, but I think he could, but there's no point in letting him go. Right. And at the end of the day, like, he's still really good and he's only going to get better. So no issues with that. The Quickly one, that's a lot of money, right? Like, make no mistake. That's a lot of money for a guy who's a good player,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a lot of money for that guy. But I understand, like, again, he had a solid season. We'll see if he continues to get better. He's a little bit older, so I'm curious to see how much more he develops. But regardless, this team is going to be bad. Aside from re-signing their own guys, none of what they really did in the offseason really impresses me. So it's like, I'm not going to give him an F because I don't think it's that bad. But I mean, C-, D+.
You're generous.
D+.
You're
C-.
generous. You're generous.
Okay.
I gave him an F. I like Scotty Barnes. I like what they did with that. Great extension. I like the IQ one as well. Everything else, kaput, man. I don't understand. They're okay, but they're not going to be difference makers. Like, I feel like Jacoby Walter, for sure, he has the ability.
Right.
But is it going to pan out at the NBA level? Because he struggled in college. That's why he fell to 19. The other guys, they're all projects. Ulrich Chomche is a huge project. Like, he's the definition of project, along with the other guys. I think they also got Davion Mitchell in a trade, if I'm not mistaken. Not a huge difference maker, and they got rid of Jalen McDaniels, not Jaden. Don't be mistaken, Jalen. Not as good.
And then they waived Sasha Vezenkov, who I think they got from the Davion Mitchell deal.
Yeah, and then Gary Trent Jr. walks. Probably won't be missed because, if you want me to be honest, kind of started deteriorating in Toronto. At this point, not a bad player.
Not going to pay him that much per year.
Exactly.
You're already paying Scotty Barnes, already paying Emmanuel Quickly, and we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, but just really back-to-back bad off seasons for Toronto. Even last year, like with Fred VanVleet letting that go.
Right.
The other Grady Dick not panning out, the draft class being weak as it is in itself. In 2024,
and they lost that pick to the Spurs because they fell out of the top 6 protection or whatever that they had.
So nothing spectacular.
Right.
They have a pathway. They have their guy potentially. That's the thing that I think does give them a little bit of saving grace. So I do understand why you gave him a D+. Because Scotty Barnes is nice. Like, he's elite. But I think you have questions about everybody else on this roster, including IQ and RJ Barrett. Where are these guys long-term pieces, or was that just a way for you to kind of get off of those,
and
or
Barrett's
bring in some other
already
guys?
been paid, so
exactly.
now you're paying Barrett, Quickly, Barnes like huge salaries,
It's a
right?
lot of
I
money.
mean, yeah. Now, again, do they move eventually Bruce Brown? You know, do they move on from one of the other guys like a Jakob Poeltl? I don't know. Maybe they do. I feel like Brown is probably the one that they're really trying to move because at least with Poeltl, like they traded stuff to get him. So it's like he's probably they probably want him there, as the starting center. And then, but with Brown, they probably are trying to get rid of him and get something back for him. It's just again he makes 20 million, and I don't really know how easy it is to, create a deal around that. I know people have mentioned like, yeah, the Lakers talk to them, but if I'm the Lakers, am I super excited about adding a couple of salaries to bring in Bruce Brown? If it also, in addition to that, costs, a first or a first plus another first, I don't know about that one. Like,
Yeah.
like if you're Toronto, like let's say, like, this is just, and I know we probably shouldn't necessarily do this, but like, let's just say for all intents and purposes, like you do that deal and you get, you trade Bruce Brown to the Lakers. Like, what do you want back if you're Toronto? Like, I'm assuming, is it Rui? Like, is it D'Lo? Is it, is it both?
I don't think they want. I don't think they want D'Lo. I think they want Rui.
Okay.
Pair
And then,
another good wing with Scotty Barnes, because I'm telling you, like,
right.
there is a world where if Scotty Barnes takes a leap like that nobody really saw coming, all right, then this team could be half decent. I feel like of the three,
plus.
yeah, I feel like of the three bottom tier teams projected, they're the ones that are probably going to have the best season.
Yeah.
Like I feel the best about Toronto between.
They already have one of those guys.
Yeah, but yeah, I feel the best about Toronto between Brooklyn, the Raptors, and the Wizards. That's the projected bottom three. And if you want to throw in Detroit there, I mean, maybe. I mean, I feel like I'm a little bit higher on Detroit than Toronto. That might be a super duper hot take, but at the end of the day, I don't really see Toronto doing too much. So that's why I gave them an F. And they didn't do anything. They really didn't. Outside of kind of going with the script and going with the flow, they kind of just did what they did the bare minimum in terms of use your draft picks, re-signed all the guys that needed to be re-signed and that you liked, and you let other guys walk, which is fine. But
so what's the starting lineup for this group? So I'm assuming it's some combination of Quickly. I guess really the real question is who starts alongside Quickly, because we know RJ, Barnes, Poeltl, and Quickly are all going to start. So who's the fifth starter, I guess, is really the better question. Is it Grady Dick? Is it Bruce Brown until he gets moved? Is it, do they give somebody else a try? It's probably one of those two, since, especially since Gary Trent Jr. is gone. But, who knows? But I feel like it's probably going to be a battle between those two guys, because I don't feel like they're going to start Jacoby Walter over those two, since he's the 19th pick of the draft versus Dick was, a pick in the draft last year, so he's in year 2.
Yeah.
Then you have Brown, who's a veteran. So it's going to be a battle between those two. So
I feel like I'm going Grady Dick here. I feel like Bruce Brown comes off the bench, elite bench player. He was an elite bench player and an elite guy for a title team. I just think Grady Dick is the guy.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, that's what it is. It's basically Bruce Brown. It's Brown versus Dick, I guess, in this battle. So So essentially, it's Brown versus Dick for that final spot in the starting five.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like, but I don't know, because again, Brown's the veteran, and it's not like this really matters too much, right? Because they're still gonna be bad. Right? It's just like you said, they may not record-wise be as bad as some of those other teams because their starting point is a little bit better than, say, the Wizards or the Nets, right? Like, you could say the Pistons' starting point might be better, maybe, but also like Detroit, I probably just feel like just has more good players than Toronto, so I could see, and versus the Raptors, this is kind of like now this is the first full year where they know going in we're trying to be bad.
Yes.
Like I don't know if they I could be with Siakam on the roster, they could have said going into the year, well, we're going to try to be good, because
I think that's what happened.
because teams will always try to talk themselves into the idea of we could be good, and then reality always wins, right? So then eventually, you know, the Raptors, come in and they're like, oh, well, no, now we're not actually as good as we think. So we didn't think they'd be good, but they might have thought it. Because like they didn't do much, like you said last offseason. What was it? They signed Dennis Schroeder, and I don't think they really did anything else.
So what they did was they drafted Grady Dick.
Yeah.
They signed Jalen McDaniels. They also got Marquise Noel on an undrafted deal and Schroeder. And then they let Fred VanVleet go, and then a bunch of other guys that didn't really matter.
Yeah. So in other words, nothing. So we'll see what the Raptors kind of do from here, because they're definitely in a different trajectory now. Because I don't know if they're going to be so bad that they're going to get a top 5 pick next year, but they're definitely not a playoff team, definitely not a play-in team, which, again, like, that's probably what you want, right? Because, I mean, ideally you'd like to be bottom 5, but not every bottom 5 team is going to be a bottom 5 team, because just, the math doesn't work out for them. But they're going to suck. But it's just weird because, like, we know the Nets are going to be bad, but we like their offseason. We know the Raptors are going to be bad, but we don't like their offseason. And like you said, there's not as much for the Raptors to really do compared to the Nets. It's just with the Nets, you're kind of basically almost starting from a blank slate. With the Raptors, you have guys here that you kind of already have. So maybe you like what the Raptors' young core is right now better. But again, like you said, how big of a foundational piece are those guys other than Barnes actually going to be? Like, could you see a world where the Raptors make the playoffs and this is their group? Because there was a stretch for a little bit last year when they first made that deal where they were winning games. And then, because part of the record that they had right now was you had that long stretch where both both Barrett and Quickly were out, for some personal reasons. And then Barnes missed the latter part of the season. So there is a world where maybe they are better than what they showed last year, but it's still not going to be good enough to be a playoff team. And my concern would be, if I'm the Raptors, is I'd rather just be really bad than be, kind of just forced into that 8 to 10 spot and then lose in the play-in and then just be like, somewhere between like the 18th to 21st best team.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't really want to be there. That's kind of the worst spot to be in.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So, not a huge fan of what they did, but to be fair, like you said, not a whole lot they could really do. They did what they mainly needed to do is re-sign guys that they acquired, draft a couple guys that they could draft, and the rest will probably come from trades, maybe later in the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a world where, like, by the deadline, Bruce Brown, maybe Olynyk, maybe somebody else could be gone, but for now, it feels like those guys are kind of stuck there.
Yep.
Yeah. So now, we get into, the news rumors bit. So, we'll start off with, something that's not a rumor, but something that actually happened. And it was Tyus Jones finally getting a roster spot. It took a while. It took, not a sign and trade, but instead he walked from Washington. So he didn't get anything back for him. And he goes to Phoenix on a minimum. So kind of an interesting signing. So I didn't initially know until we were getting ready to record that he was expected to start. But I guess in a way that makes a lot more sense why he was okay with just taking the minimum. So I want you to start off with this because, I have some thoughts about it, but I kind of want to, hear what you have to say first before I kind of not interject. Obviously you're going to say what you got to say, but I have some thoughts about it, but I kind of want to hear from you first.
From the Suns' perspective, this is amazing. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when we first started talking about Tyus Jones and where he could possibly go, I think we had both kind of clicked in our brains where it's like, Phoenix is perfect. They need a point guard badly.
Right.
And yeah, it's awesome because you get a quality point guard, a guy who takes care of the ball, has been labeled as an assist or a on-court coach, with his assist to turnover ratio and what he's able to do with the ball in his hands and kind of command an offense and learn it very quickly and just be, the voice of the coach out there on the floor. I think it's awesome because that's what you're going to need in Phoenix. And they didn't have that calming presence last year. That's why they look so freaking volatile in the playoffs where, everybody was kind of just liable to blow up because there was no calming presence there.
Right.
And he's a veteran. He's been around for a long time. It's not like he's, a new guy on the block. And it's a very team-friendly deal. A minimum, that's crazy. It's a minimum. So, it's not like you're paying him starter money, because my thought process with Tyus Jones was, I thought, he was looking for starter money and looking to start somewhere. And my question was, there's not a lot of, if any, starting point guard spots open. And definitely nobody really wants to pay you starter money, considering the CBA and stuff like that. From the perspective of Washington, that sucks, because I heard that you could have gotten, some first round picks for this guy earlier, deadline-ish, but
because we thought he might get moved.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was gone by the deadline for sure. I thought this was going to be, his spot to not necessarily rehab his value, because I think his value is already pretty good. I just thought, he could potentially be moved for a first round pick. So if you're Washington, that stinks for me personally. But I think he makes a huge impact. And I heard, I think it was the owner or governor, whatever, and, some other factors that, persuaded him to go to this team to be a starter. My only question with it is, if you're starting, what happens? So does that mean Beal moves to 2, Book moves to 3, Katie to 4?
Right, and then Nurkic.
And then Nurk? I mean, it's not game changing, but it makes me feel better about the roster, though, where it's like, all right, now we don't have to rely on Beal or Book to be the point guard. We have the facilitator. And it's not like he can't shoot. He can shoot.
Right. Yeah, and that's how I feel about it, where once I heard that now he's going to be a starter, I don't have a problem with it, but I don't like it as much as if he was just the backup point guard, because I just feel like I'm just thinking about it, like, from the perspective of, like, say, like, against the Wolves last year, like, if you put him in that starting 5, right, instead of, I guess, Grayson Allen, like, the offense is going to look better, but I have a little bit of concerns about, like, okay, that's basically more guys for Anthony Edwards to get ready to attack.
They still lose that series.
Yeah, like, you still lose, and that's, exactly. And that's how I feel about it, where it's like, I think it helps them on offense for sure. It makes a lot more sense. And like you said, it's better than having Monte Morris,
100%.
as your either backup or, starting. I guess Morris is the backup now, but, but like with Jones, like, he's, as the point guard, it's interesting, because I don't think he's a starting point guard. I think he's much better as a backup point guard, but it is also the veterans minimum. So it's like, are you really going to say no to getting Tyus Jones on a minimum? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's how I feel about it. Yeah. Like, where it's like how I feel about the Westbrook thing, where it's like, I don't really have, like, where it's like, I can see it working for the regular season. I just have some very, very big concerns and questions about, is it a viable playoff starting lineup? It's just like, could I see them, like, if, like, let's say they somehow get to the finals and they're going against Boston, and you're basically asking Kevin Durant at the 4 and Nurkic at the 5 to try to defend a back line that has Devin Booker as the small forward, and Bradley Beal as the guard, and then Tyus Jones as the other guard.
It's not going to work.
I have some more concerns about that. But again, I look at it from the perspective of, it's a good minimum contract signing. I just don't really like him being the starter, because I don't think he's a starter.
Okay. I mean, that's fair, because I watched my fair share of Wizards games, obviously, and I'm not saying he was bad, but it wasn't what it wasn't what I thought. Like, if you watch the game, you know what I'm talking about. Like,
you watched it in person multiple times.
Yeah, like, there's just times where he doesn't need to be out there, because not necessarily because of his ability, it's more so his frame and size, if you want me to be honest. There's only but so much a guy of his stature can do, and in Memphis, you look at what he was able to do. Oh my gosh, best backup point guard in the league. That's why I was kind of hyped when the Wizards got him, and I thought JP was going to start at the 1, and then it come to find out Tyus at the 1, JP's at the 2. I'm like, that's the season right there.
I had DeLon Wright as the starting point guard, and then Jordan Poole as the 2 guard. So then it's like, okay, you have like a 3-and-D point guard next to Poole, but then Poole does more of the ball handling and scoring, responsibilities. But and then
because here's my thing. One more thing. Like, let's take the Minnesota series. Like, I think it's a good point. Remember when Beal got freaking bullied by Anthony Edwards?
Yeah.
If you put Tyus Jones in the situation, it probably happens more often than the Beal one, if you want me to be honest. Like, no matter who it is, like if it's an elite team that they face in the first round, second round, or say they do make it to the finals, Tyus Jones is getting picked on, and there's nothing he can do about it. Like, he can make up for it in the offensive end, but defensively, it's not going to work.
Yeah, but then even in the postseason, you look at his career splits in the postseason.
They're horrible.
Right? So, like, if you look at regular season, 45 from the field, 37 from three. Did have a very good year last year, right? He averaged 12.7 assists, 49 from the field, 41 from three, right? One of the best floaters that you'll see from an undersized guard, as we've talked about many times. And he shot very well from three, 41% on 4 attempts a game. But then you look at the playoffs, 37 from the field, 31 from three, 6 points, 3 assists. Very, like you said, low turnover assist ratio. That's great. I remember he played against the Lakers in the playoffs, and I remember the one game that Ja was out. I think he was a game where he played relatively fine.
Yeah.
But in that series, 4.5 points, 3.7 assists, 31% from the field, 16% from three. And again, you're playing with a different group of players than you were playing in Memphis because this is a more, offensive inclined roster, right? Like you're not playing next to, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bain, Ja Morant, which, again, they're good in their own right. But then, the bench is a little bit more weird. It's now Durant, Booker, Beal. So, I look at it from the perspective of good signing. I think it'll help them in the regular season. I think it will help stabilize their offense, but defensively, still some problems. And I think that's, at least with the Suns, at least you can say, now their offense probably will make more sense. So now their identity is an offensive-oriented team. So that's kind of the good thing. And that's why, like I said, I don't think it's a bad signing. It's a good signing, especially for the minimum. It's just, does it make me feel different about Phoenix? Not really. It makes me feel like they could probably win some more regular season games, but I don't think that they'll be able to be good enough to get out of the West, which is kind of the goal, at least for that team, right? It'd be one thing if you went to, I don't know, even if it was Denver, it's oh, that'd be awesome, right? Because they have, I think, a little bit more of an infrastructure put in place for them. But with the Suns, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. But again, you can't hate on the fact that it's a minimum contract. I think, every team would love to have him as a backup point guard for sure. I'd love to have him as a backup point guard.
Yeah.
But do I want him as a starter? No. Keep him away from the starting lineup.
Yeah, and when Jordan Poole, from the Wizards' perspective, once Jordan Poole started starting and Tyus Jones came off the bench and they needed to ease Tyus Jones back in, Tyus Jones looked pretty good and Jordan Poole looked the best he had been in a Wizards uniform. So I think it speaks volumes to what Tyus Jones' true role in the NBA is going to be. And my bold prediction is not that he's going to be off the roster, but he probably falls out of the rotation, or not falls out of the rotation, but but is not a starter by the time, whether it be all-star break or playoffs, either one of those, I think he's not the starter by then.
Do you think that eventually they come off of, that starting spot that we promised you? Yeah, you're not going to get it.
I mean, I think they give it to him. They give him the test run,
sure.
But as soon as, the holes start to kind of become prevalent, not to say he falls out of rotation, but I think he goes back to the bench.
Right. And again, that was news to me. I don't know if that was initially reported.
It was.
When Woj put it out. I guess it was.
It was the second tweet that he put out.
Okay.
And I read the first 3 sentences. I was like, great.
Well, yeah, because that was news to me. That was where I'm like, okay, I like the signing for sure. I just don't really love the idea of him starting. I just feel like, again, if you're, but again, at the end of the day, they did need a point guard for sure. It's just I didn't expect it to be a starting point guard, but it's also tough because it's well, if he doesn't start, then you're still gonna have the same issue as you had before, where it's they're still gonna be chaotic. It's still gonna look like a mess. But at least with him starting, it makes more sense. Like I said, I expect them to probably win around the same amount of regular season games, maybe a little bit more because they won 49, so they could win 50 plus. It's just, again, you still need those guys to be healthy. which, again, like Beal wasn't, but Booker and Durant were pretty healthy for most of the season. But like I said, I know it sounds like I'm hating on the signing. I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, it's a good
Yeah.
signing for a minimum contract because, again, we talked about him where we thought he was going to, he's not going to make 20 million a year or anything like crazy like that, but we thought he could get like exception level money as a backup point guard somewhere. But yeah, where it definitely hurts the most definitely is Washington, because just the fact that even if what you got from him at the deadline wasn't anything, but the idea of them basically saying, yeah, we don't like what teams are offering for Tyus Jones, so we're not going to trade him. We're going to think about re-signing him, and then he just walks for the minimum. Yeah, I don't really love that.
Crazy.
Like,
Horrible.
like that's how I feel about that. But again, like, am I going to sit here and say the Wizards, fumbled the bag this offseason? Like, no, I'm not going to sit here and say that at all. It's just, because you're not going to hit on everything. It's just, if you're the Wizards, I'm sure somebody would have willing, even if it was like a second. Like, are you really going to be like, oh, that's not enough for Tyus Jones? Like, I mean,
Right.
I don't know. It feels like some of these teams had a little bit of an inflated sense of the value of some of these players. But again, for the Suns, it's a good signing. You know what I mean? Like I said, I don't want to make it seem like it's not. I don't like him as a starter.
Yeah.
But I understand it
I
from the
agree.
perspective of, again, if that's what it takes to get him to come there, I mean, I guess you kind of have to do it. I guess, right? Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you're not gonna sit here and say like, oh, there's a good player who wants to come here for the minimum, but but we have to start him, right? Like, it's not like it's a situation where, like, I don't know, say like a Cam Reddish, right? Like, you know, he didn't start, but he started at one point. But he did play, a decent amount, right? And it's like, if that's what you have to do in order to get a guy like that to come there, I don't know. That's not an ideal situation. But for a guy like a Tyus Jones, yeah, sure. But okay.
Yeah.
I'm
We'll
just saying,
see.
like, good luck trying to get stops with, with that.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. All three of those guys together. Yeah. GG.
Yeah. Yeah, with Nurkic again, with Nurkic as your rim protector. It's not like we're
Yeah.
talking about, some bouncy, switchable big, right? It's not like it's Bam, or AD or something like that, right? And that's kind of the funny thing where I'm thinking about it now with the Olympics. Well, I guess now, like, yeah, Booker's kind of playing small forward a lot for the Olympics, so I guess that's what he'll do for the Suns.
Yeah.
But again, the back line for the Olympics is different than the back line for the Suns.
Very.
Yeah, but most importantly, they have more depth regardless. So that's really the big thing, because now you have, at the very least, you can say we have more playable guys than we did last season, right? Because, I mean, you moved a bunch of those guys for Royce O'Neal, and Royce O'Neal is a more playable guy than, Keita Bates-Diop or Yuta Watanabe. And then Tyus Jones is still a more playable guy than nobody. So
Yeah. Exactly.
like, you know
Literally.
what I mean? Like, yeah, like having him is still better than not having any backup point guard. Because again,
Literally.
you couldn't ask for too many more backup point guards that are better than that. It's just, again, I don't like the fit as a starter, but I'm also not going to sit here and say like, like, oh, does Tyus Jones put the Suns into the same group as the top four?
No.
Like, probably not. But I think it makes it more interesting.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on, Team USA's, first, official win in the Olympics over Serbia. Let us know your thoughts on the Brooklyn Nets and the Toronto Raptors off seasons, because they were doozies for sure. And let us know your thoughts on the Tyus Jones signing, right? I think most people like it. I think almost everybody likes it, right? Obviously you can nitpick and, pick and choose at different things, but ultimately it's a quality signing, but maybe somebody disagrees. But either way, just so that way everybody knows, thanks to everybody for helping us get to over 100 subs, trying to get to 500. So continue to like, comment, and subscribe to help us out. We're also going to continue to do off streams, we're also going to continue to do live streams of the Off Ball Takes podcast, following a lot of these Team USA games. So keep in mind as well, the next one is Wednesday against South Sudan. So we appreciate all that, and we'll see you either in the next episode or the next live stream.